The savannah stretched endlessly beneath the weight of the midday sun, its grasses swaying gently in the heat, the land parched and quiet. The usual chorus of life, chirps, rustlings, the distant calls of predators seemed muted, as though the earth itself had paused. The man, moving slowly through the dry landscape, took careful steps, his boots sinking slightly into the dirt. He was accustomed to the silence of the savannah, but today something felt different. It wasn't the calm of the wild, but the quiet before something unnerving. Then it came, the cry. It was low, guttural, but unlike any sound he'd heard before. His heart raced, each beat in sync with the cry that pierced the air, raw and filled with distress. He paused for a moment, straining to listen, his senses alert. The sound carried across the plains, unmistakable in its desperation, a call for help from an animal in fear. The man's pulse quickened, his instincts igniting. He knew this was a call that couldn't be ignored. He moved swiftly, the dry grasses whispering against his legs as he made his way towards the source. The landscape unfolded before him, and there, barely visible through the tangle of brush, he saw it, a small lion cub. Its tiny body was trapped in a maze of thick vines, the branches wrapping tightly around its limbs, preventing it from moving freely. The cub's cries were sharp, frantic, each one filled with terror. The man's heart sank as he saw the young lion, its fur matted with dirt and the exertion of its struggle. Its wide eyes flickered with confusion and fear, its small body wriggling against the restraints. But the more it struggled, the more tangled it became. Each attempt to free itself seemed to deepen its despair. The man's thoughts raced. He had seen young predators caught in traps before, wild and wild-hearted, but never so helpless. The desperation in the cub's eyes pulled at him. It wasn't just the fear of being trapped. It was the realization that the cub had no way of freeing itself. Alone and vulnerable, it was at the mercy of the land. The man's chest tightened as he crouched beside the cub, his hands hovering near its body. He had to act quickly, but the risk was high. There was always the possibility of a mother nearby, hidden in the grass, watching from a distance. The man hesitated for just a second, but the cub's cries left him no choice. With a deep breath, he reached for the vines, his movements slow and deliberate. He could feel the tension in the air, a palpable uncertainty. His fingers brushed against the cub's fur, and the small body tensed at his touch. The cub flinched, its tiny form trembling with each movement, but it made no attempt to bite or lash out. There was no aggression, only panic. The man spoke gently, his voice soft but steady. "It's okay, little one," he whispered, though he knew the words were more for his own comfort than for the cub's understanding. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the man carefully worked to untangle the vines from the cub's limbs. The little lion's body continued to shudder with fear, but as the man's hands worked steadily, something changed. The cub's frantic cries softened just for a moment. It seemed to understand that the stranger was not a threat. It paused, its wide eyes flicking to the man's face, as if seeking reassurance. For a moment, the savannah seemed to hold its breath. The cub lay still, its body trembling but no longer struggling. It was as though the quiet presence of the man had given it a sense of hope. The man's hands were gentle but firm as he finished clearing the final strands of vine from the cub's legs. There was no time for celebration, only the awareness that the cub still needed help. Its small body, exhausted from the struggle, collapsed onto the ground in a heap. the weight of its ordeal settling heavily upon it. The cub's breath came in shallow, quick bursts, its tiny chest heaving with the strain. The man stepped back slowly, watching with cautious eyes. It was free now, no longer trapped by the vines, but it was still fragile. Its tiny form shivered slightly, weak from the exertion. The man stayed still, waiting, not wanting to crowd the cub, not wanting to intrude on its moment of recovery. For a few moments, there was only silence. The cub's cries had stopped, replaced by soft whimpers as it slowly began to lift its head, searching for the source of its distress. The world around them was still, the harsh cries of the cub now gone, leaving behind a quieter, more peaceful atmosphere. Yet the silence was heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. The cub's life had been spared, but the savannah's unforgiving nature had only begun to reveal itself. The man stayed by the cub's side for a while longer, watching closely, unsure of what might come next. The cub, though still weak, began to regain some of its strength, lifting itself onto its unsteady legs. It was small, fragile, but it was no longer trapped. The man allowed a quiet breath to escape his lips. He had done what he could. It was now up to the cub to find its own way. And though its journey was far from over for now, the savannah seemed just a little less lonely. The young lion cub, now freed from the snare, lay on the ground, still trembling from the struggle. Its body was weak, drained from the effort to escape, and its shallow breaths came in quick bursts. The man, kneeling beside it, was careful not to disturb the fragile calm. His hand hovered near the cub, unsure whether to touch it again, but he remained still, watching as the cub slowly regained its breath. The savannah around them, once so alive with the hum of nature, now seemed quieter, as if the land itself had paused to witness this delicate moment. The man's eyes scanned the horizon, ever alert to the shifting air, to the subtle changes in the world around them. Then, without warning, the atmosphere changed. The air thickened, and the faintest rustle of movement through the tall grasses caught the man's attention. His heart skipped a beat. His eyes narrowed against the harsh glare of the sun, trying to make sense of the figure emerging from the tall grass. At first, it was a shadow, a dark shape moving silently, partially hidden by the golden waves of the savannah. But then, the shape became clearer. There she was. The lioness stood motionless, her amber eyes fixed on the scene before her. Her body was tense, the kind of stillness only a mother could possess when watching over her young. Her gaze was unwavering, focused solely on the cub, and for a moment the man felt the intensity of her stare. It was a silent communication, a warning, a question without words. The air seemed to thicken around her, the presence of her protective instincts creating a palpable force in the savannah. She was both a shadow and a force of nature, silent yet undeniably powerful. The man felt her strength from where he knelt, and he understood this was her realm, and he was a mere observer in the delicate dance of life. The man didn't move. He didn't take his eyes off the lioness, aware that one wrong step could shift the balance of this fragile moment. He knew that his presence was an intrusion on the natural order, but he had done what he could. Now, it was the lioness's turn to take control. She remained still, her eyes flickering between the cub and the man, assessing the situation. There was no fear in her gaze, but there was a quiet understanding. The cub had been in danger, and he had intervened, but now it was time for the bond between mother and child to take precedence. The man remained as still as the lioness, his hand hovering close to the cub, but not yet touching it. He had no intention of claiming any victory here. His role was small, a brief moment in the grand, unspoken rhythm of the savannah. It was the lioness who would provide what the cub needed now: protection, reassurance, the healing presence of a mother. Slowly, as if the savannah itself had given its permission, the lioness took a step forward. Her movement was fluid, purposeful, and with each stride, the power within her seemed to resonate through the land. Her eyes never left the cub, her focus unbroken. The cub, still weak, lifted its head with a soft sound, something between a grunt and a whimper. The lioness's body tensed for just a moment, her muscles coiling in a brief flash of caution. But then, as if something deep within her shifted, she moved forward with a quiet grace, lowering her body towards the cub. She sniffed the air, her nostrils flaring as she recognized the familiar scent. Her eyes softened, and in that moment, the trust between mother and child was undeniable. The lioness paused just above the cub, and with a gentle nudge of her nose, she encouraged the cub to rise. There was no growl, no hint of aggression, only a mother's care, instinctual and unwavering. The cub, still weak but now finding strength in its mother's presence, pushed itself up onto its feet with a soft grunt. It leaned into the lioness's side for support, its body unsteady but determined. There was no hostility in the air, no anger, only the overwhelming sense of relief that comes with the return of what was always meant to be. The savannah once again hummed with the quiet sounds of life, the tension dissipating as the bond between mother and cub was restored. The man, still kneeling at a respectful distance, felt a quiet sense of peace settle over him. His role had ended for now, and the savannah continued its eternal rhythm. The lioness and her cub, though scarred by the ordeal, were together again. And in that moment, the wild world seemed to breathe again. The lioness, her body still marked by the ordeal, lowered her head toward her cub with a tenderness that seemed at odds with the rawness of the situation. Her movements, once sharp and defensive, had softened, and the cub, still shaken but now more stable, rested against her side. The air around them, heavy with the weight of what had transpired, seemed to settle in the stillness of the moment. The cub, its small form trembling slightly, turned toward its mother, seeking the comfort that only she could provide. With a gentle nudge, the lioness pressed her nose against the cub's head, her large, warm body offering a silent reassurance. There was no need for words. This was a quiet understanding between mother and child, a bond that was both primal and profound. The man, who had stood by with quiet reverence, watched as the lioness continued to nuzzle her cub. His heart, once heavy with concern and uncertainty, began to settle as he observed the trust that had begun to form between them. He had come to help, to intervene, but now he realized that there was something else unfolding in front of him, a rare and fragile moment of connection, one that transcended the human world and reached into the heart of nature itself. The lioness had accepted him not with a show of dominance or aggression, but with a quiet acknowledgement. The tension in the air had lifted, replaced by the slow rhythm of motherly care. The cub, its body still weak from the ordeal, pressed closer to its mother, seeking the warmth and safety that only she could provide. The lioness's nuzzle was gentle, almost tender, as if she too recognized the fragility of the moment. Her large, powerful form loomed over her cub, yet every touch was filled with a quiet strength, a protective instinct that would not waver. The cub, sensing its mother's presence and comfort, relaxed into her embrace, its tiny body no longer trembling with the same fear it had earlier. In that moment, the world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the soft sounds of the lioness's breathing and the steady presence of the man watching from a distance. There was no rush, no urgency. Now, the danger had passed, and the lioness, in her own time, began to care for her cub in the way only she knew how. The man stood still, his heart full but quiet, respecting the space between them. The bond between mother and cub, once threatened by the chaos of the moment, had been reaffirmed in the stillness that followed. The lioness, still wary but now less tense, glanced briefly towards the man, her eyes meeting his with a quiet understanding. It was a fleeting moment, but it carried with it the weight of everything that had transpired. A recognition of the shared space they now occupied, a moment of respect between two beings who had, in their own way, helped each other survive. As the minutes passed, the lioness's protective gaze never wavered from her cub. The man, his role now complete, slowly stepped back, giving them the space they needed. He had witnessed something profound, a quiet affirmation of trust that could not be rushed or forced. The lioness, though still cautious, seemed to accept the man's presence now, not as an intruder, but as a part of this fragile moment of recovery. The cub, once so vulnerable, had found solace in its mother's care, and in turn, the man had found something too, an understanding of the delicate balance that existed between them, a bond forged not through action, but through shared silence. The air around them, once thick with tension, had shifted into a calm, a gentle resolution. The lioness, her cub safe beside her, stood as a testament to the resilience of life, to the quiet strength that existed within the wild. The man, his heart still full with the memory of the moment, watched as they slowly moved, their forms blending into the savannah. The bond between them, though unspoken, would remain, a quiet connection that would echo in the stillness of the land.